Sometimes the most successful people are the loneliest ones behind closed doors. Sometimes it takes breaking down in the middle of nowhere to discover what really matters in life. When tech CEO Celeste Langford's Bentley dies in a small town, she storms into Mason Reyes's auto shop, demanding he fix it in 1 hour. He's a widowed mechanic with gentle hands and a sleeping child in the back office. She threatens his livelihood if he fails. He quietly accepts her challenge. But in that cramped garage filled with family photos and handmade toys, something unexpected happens. 2 broken hearts begin to heal as the clock ticks down. The question isn't whether he can fix her car in time, it's whether 1 hour is enough to fix the loneliness that's been eating them both alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other Tuesday in Celeste Langford's precisely orchestrated life. Her alarm sounded at 4:47. Not 4, 45, not 5, 0, but exactly 13 minutes before the hour, because studies showed odd numbers increased cognitive alertness. By 5:15, she'd completed her workout on the Peloton in her minimalist San Francisco penthouse. By 5:45, she'd consumed her carefully measured protein shake while scanning overnight emails from her global team. By 6:30, she was dressed in her signature charcoal suit, hair pulled back in a flawless chignon that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Celeste had built Langford Technologies from a cramped garage startup into a $15 billion empire in just 12 years. She was profiled on magazine covers with headlines like "The Ice Queen Who Melts Competition" and "Silicon Valley's Most Ruthless Visionary." At 38, she commanded boardrooms filled with men twice her age, crushed quarterly earnings expectations, and had never missed a deadline, never backed down from a fight, never shown weakness. She had also never been married, never had children, and couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged her without wanting something in return. The Bentley Continental GT had been her reward for closing the Morrison acquisition, $2.7 billion that had made her competitors weep and financial analysts bow in reverence. The car was midnight black with cream leather interior, equipped with every technological advantage money could buy. It was beautiful, powerful, and completely isolated from the world outside its tinted windows. Much like its owner, she'd been driving to the Riverside Development Meeting, another small town her company planned to transform into a luxury resort complex, when the engine began making sounds no Bentley should ever make. Steam rose from under the hood as she pulled into the dusty main street of Milbrook, population 847, according to a sun-faded sign that looked older than disco music. The town stretched exactly 4 blocks along a cracked state highway, a diner with chipped paint and handwritten specials in the window, a general store that appeared to stock everything from fishing tackle to birthday cards, a small library with children's artwork taped to the glass, and at the far end, like a beacon of hope in her mechanical crisis, Reyes Auto Repair. The garage looked like it had been built in the 1950s and maintained with love rather than money. 2 service bays, both currently occupied by pickup trucks that had seen better decades. Hand-painted signs advertised "honest work at fair prices" and "we fix what others can't." A wooden bench sat outside under a faded awning, probably where customers waited while their lives were put back in mechanical order. Celeste stepped out of her disabled Bentley, designer heels clicking against oil-stained concrete. The heat hit her immediately, not the dry, controlled warmth of her climate-controlled world, but the thick, honest heat of a desert town at noon. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she felt her perfect composure beginning to crack. The garage smelled of motor oil, metal shavings, and something indefinably comforting, the scent of work being done by capable hands. Classic rock played softly from a radio balanced on a toolbox. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. And there, bent over the engine of a red pickup truck, was Mason Reyes. He straightened as she entered, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen countless such cleanings. Mason was perhaps 40, with dark hair showing the first threads of silver and brown eyes that held depths she couldn't immediately categorize. His work shirt bore the garage's logo and several stains that testified to honest labor. His jeans were faded but clean, his boots worn but well-maintained. What struck her most was his stillness. In her world, everyone moved with frantic energy, fingers constantly tapping phones, minds racing to the next deal, the next conquest. Mason moved with deliberate calm, as if he had all the time in the world and intended to use it wisely. "Can I help you?" His voice was warm, with the slight roughness of someone who'd spent years breathing air that wasn't filtered through expensive systems. "My car broke down." She gestured toward the Bentley as if its obvious superiority should explain everything. "I need it fixed immediately." Mason glanced past her to the sleek vehicle, then back to her face. No reverence, no intimidation, just assessment. "What seems to be the problem?" "How should I know? I don't fix cars, I pay other people to make sure they work." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but stress was making her revert to her default setting, commanding control through vocal dominance. He nodded slowly, apparently unfazed by her tone. "Let me take a look." As he walked toward her car, Celeste noticed the way he moved unhurried but purposeful, like a man who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. She followed, her heels totally inappropriate for the rough pavement, feeling ridiculous and angry about feeling ridiculous. Mason popped the hood and peered into the engine compartment. Steam still rose from various components, and even Celeste could see that several parts looked distressed. He touched nothing, just looked with the focused attention of someone who could read mechanical languages she didn't even know existed. "When did you last have it serviced?" he asked without looking up. "I don't know. My assistant handles that." "What kind of sounds was it making?" "Bad ones." Mason finally looked at her, and she caught something in his expression, not judgment exactly, but a kind of gentle amusement that made her feel simultaneously defensive and curious. "This is going to take some time to diagnose properly," he said. "Probably a few hours of work, maybe more depending on what's wrong and what parts I can get." "A few hours?" Celeste's voice pitched higher than she liked. "I have a meeting in Riverside at 3 o'clock. It's absolutely critical." "I understand, but—" "No, you don't understand." She stepped closer, using height and proximity the way she'd learned to intimidate boardroom opponents. "I am Celeste Langford. I run a $15 billion company. That meeting represents a $100 million development project. I cannot be late." Mason didn't step back. He didn't seem impressed. He simply listened with the same calm attention he'd given her engine. "I need this car fixed in 1 hour," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "1 hour, or I will make sure you never work on another car again. I will destroy your business, your reputation, your life. Do you understand me?" The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of the radio. Mason regarded her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing something she hadn't intended to show. "I understand you're upset," he said finally. "And I understand you're used to getting what you want when you want it. But cars don't care about your schedule, and threatening me won't make the parts work any faster. Are you refusing to help me?" "No, ma'am. I'm accepting your challenge." He closed the hood gently, as if it were made of something precious rather than German engineering. 1 hour. "But I'm not promising miracles, and I'm not promising it'll be pretty." Something in his tone, no defiance, not submission, but a kind of steady acceptance, caught her off guard. She'd expected either cowering agreement or defensive anger. This quiet competence was something new in her experience. "Fine," she said, though nothing about this situation felt fine. 1 hour. As Mason began wheeling a diagnostic machine toward her car, a small sound came from the back of the garage. Celeste turned to see a child's sleeping area, tucked into what had probably once been a storage closet, a narrow cot with rumpled sheets, a stuffed elephant, and drawings taped to the walls. And there, rubbing sleep from her eyes, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "Daddy," the child's voice was soft with drowsiness and complete trust. "Is everything okay?" Mason's entire demeanor shifted, becoming somehow even more gentle. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." "But there's a lady here." The little girl looked at Celeste with curious brown eyes that were miniature versions of her father's. "This is Miss Langford. Her car needs fixing. Can you say hello?" The child stepped forward with the fearless confidence of someone who'd never learned that the world might hurt her. "Hi, Miss Langford. I'm Emma. Are you having a bad day?" Celeste stared down at the child, momentarily speechless. When was the last time someone had asked about her day? When was the last time someone had looked at her with simple, uncomplicated interest? "Eyes," she found herself saying. "My car broke down." "That's okay," Emma said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Daddy fixes everything. He fixed my bike when the chain fell off, and he fixed my stuffed elephant when his ear got torn, and he even fixed the toaster when it started smoking." "Emma," Mason said gently, "why don't you draw a picture while I work? Maybe something nice for Miss Langford." The little girl beamed and scampered back to her corner, apparently delighted by the assignment. Celeste watched this interaction with growing unease. There was something here she didn't recognize, a kind of easy affection, a comfortable rhythm between father and daughter that spoke of countless similar moments. It was foreign to her, this casual tenderness, this assumption of love and safety. On Mason's workbench, partially hidden behind a stack of invoices, sat a framed photograph. A younger Mason smiled out from the picture, his arm around a woman with dark hair and laugh lines, Emma, as a toddler perched between them. The woman had the same warm eyes as her daughter, and the three of them looked utterly, completely happy. But the photo was edged in black, and Celeste realized with a jolt that this was a memorial glimpse of a family that was now incomplete. Mason caught her looking and didn't try to hide the picture or explain it away. "My wife, Maria," he said simply. "She passed 2 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Celeste heard herself say, and meant it more than she'd expected to. "Thank you." He plugged the diagnostic machine into her car's computer system. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said the people who acted the toughest usually needed the most kindness." The words hit her like a gentle blow, unexpected and somehow devastating. She turned away, focusing on her phone, on the dozens of messages that had accumulated in the 15 minutes since she'd left her controlled world and entered this one. But as Mason began his work, and Emma hummed softly while drawing, Celeste found herself stealing glances at that photograph on the workbench the artifact of a love so complete it had created its own warm gravity, pulling everything into its orbit. For the first time in years, she wondered what it might feel like to be part of something like that. The clock on the garage wall read 12:17, 57 minutes to go. Celeste's phone buzzed against her palm like an angry hornet. 3 missed calls from her CFO, 2 from her head of development, and a text from her assistant that made her stomach clench. Board moved meeting to 2:30. Henderson threatening to pull funding if you're not there. She stared at the message, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes crises. This was her element, the place where she thrived, where other people's panic became her opportunity to demonstrate why she commanded 8-figure salaries and inspired equal measures of fear and respect. But standing in this oil-stained garage, watching Mason methodically test her car's electrical systems while his daughter hummed nursery rhymes in the corner, the urgency felt different somehow, distant, like watching a fire through bulletproof glass. "How bad is it?" she asked, moving closer to where Mason worked. He didn't look up from the diagnostic screen. "Bad enough. Your engine's running too hot, and it looks like your cooling system has multiple failures. Could be a blown gasket, could be a cracked block, could be both. In English, please. Your car is seriously sick. Fixing it right is going to take more than an hour, probably more than a day." Celeste felt something cold settle in her chest. "That's not acceptable." "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but—" "No, You don't understand anything. She stepped closer, using the intimidation tactics that had served her so well in countless negotiations. Do you know what happens if I miss this meeting? $100 million disappears. 300 jobs disappear. An entire community development project dies because some small-town mechanic couldn't do his job fast enough. Mason straightened slowly, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been irritation flicker across his features. And do you know what happens if I rush this repair and your engine seizes up on the highway? You could die. That seems more important than your meeting. Don't lecture me about importance. I make decisions that affect thousands of people every single day. Like what? The question caught her off guard. Excuse me? What decisions? What do you actually do that's so critical? Celeste blinked, momentarily speechless. No one had ever asked her to explain her importance before it was simply accepted as fact. I run a technology company. We develop software solutions for enterprise clients. We employ 12,000 people globally. That sounds impressive, Mason said, returning to his diagnostic work. What kind of software? Efficiency optimization platforms. We help companies streamline their operations, reduce redundancies, maximize profit margins. By firing people? By eliminating inefficiencies. Same thing, isn't it? Before Celeste could formulate a response that didn't sound heartless, Emma appeared at her elbow, holding up a piece of construction paper covered in crayon marks. I made this for you, the little girl announced proudly. Celeste looked down at the drawing, and something inside her chest did an unexpected little flip. It was clearly meant to be a car, though. It looked more like a colorful rectangle with 4 circles attached. But Emma had drawn it with obvious love and attention, adding details that spoke to a child's careful observation. Windows with smiling faces inside, flowers growing from the bumpers, and what appeared to be wings sprouting from the roof. It's a flying car, Emma explained solemnly. So if it breaks down, you can just fly where you need to go. Celeste stared at the drawing, holding it carefully as if it might dissolve in her hands. When was the last time someone had made something just for her? When was the last time anyone had thought about solving her problems with such innocent creativity? Thank you, she managed, her voice coming out rougher than intended. It sits very thoughtful. Emma beamed, clearly delighted by the response. Daddy says when people are sad, sometimes they just need something beautiful to look at. I'm not sad, Celeste said automatically. You look sad, Emma replied with the brutal honesty of childhood. Like when Mrs. Patterson's cat died and she came to get her car fixed, but mostly she just wanted someone to talk to. Emma, Mason called gently from under the hood. Why don't you work on your coloring book for a while? But Emma wasn't finished with her assessment. Are you married? She asked Celeste. No. Do you have kids? No. Do you have a dog? No. Emma's face scrunched up in concentration, as if she were trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. What do you do when you get home from work? The question hit Celeste like a physical blow. What did she do? She reviewed reports, she answered emails, she prepared for the next day's battles. She ate expensive meals alone while reading industry analyses. She fell asleep to the sound of financial news, woke up to market reports, and started the cycle again. I work, she said finally. But what do you do for fun? Fun. When was the last time Celeste had done something purely for enjoyment? She couldn't remember. Everything in her life served a purpose, advanced a goal, strengthened her position. Fun was inefficient. I don't really, she began, then stopped. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that you've built a life so focused on achievement that you've forgotten how to simply enjoy being alive? Emma seemed to sense her confusion. It's okay, she said kindly. Daddy was sad for a long time too, after Mama went to heaven. But then he remembered that Mama would want him to be happy, so he started smiling again. Maybe you just forgot how to be happy, and you need someone to remind you. The child's words landed with devastating accuracy. Celeste looked down at the drawing in her hands, this artifact of pure, selfless creativity, and felt something crack open inside her chest. A place she'd kept sealed for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Your mama sounds like she was very wise, Celeste said softly. She was the best mama in the whole world, Emma replied matter-of-factly. But Daddy says she's still taking care of us, just in different ways now. Like how sometimes when I'm really sad, I find a pretty flower or see a rainbow, and I know that's Mama saying hello. Celeste felt tears, threatened actual tears, something that hadn't happened in her office, her penthouse, or any boardroom in recent memory. This child, with her handmade toy car sitting on the workbench beside her father's tools, was offering comfort to a stranger with the same natural generosity her father showed. "Celeste," Mason's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Could you come look at this?" She approached the car, still clutching Emma's drawing. Mason pointed to a series of readings on his diagnostic screen. "The good news is it's not your engine block. The bad news is your cooling system has 3 separate failures, and your transmission is showing early signs of trouble. I can get you running well enough to drive home, but it's going to be rough, and I can't guarantee you'll make it without overheating again." Celeste stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of her rapidly shrinking options. How rough. No air conditioning, limited power, and you'll need to stop every 20 miles to let everything cool down. It's not safe, and it's not smart, but it's possible. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her assistant. "Henderson's people are getting antsy. Need confirmation you'll be there." She looked at the message, then at the diagnostic screen, then at Emma's drawing still clutched in her other hand. For the first time in her professional life, she felt the competing pulls of different worlds, different priorities, different definitions of what mattered. "I have to try," she said finally. "Do whatever you can in the time we have left." Mason nodded, but she could see the concern in his eyes. 3 minutes, he said, glancing at the clock. "I'll do my best." As he dove back into the engine compartment, Celeste found herself sitting on the wooden bench outside the garage, Emma's drawing spread across her knees. The little girl had joined her, chattering about her drawings, her stuffed animals, her plans for summer vacation. And for the first time in years, Celeste found herself listening, really listening, to someone talk about joy instead of quarterly projections, about dreams instead of market analysis, about love instead of leverage. The clock ticked toward 1:00 p.m., and with each passing minute, Celeste felt herself being pulled further from the world she'd built and deeper into one she'd never known existed. Celeste's phone had become a constant source of agitation, buzzing every few minutes with increasingly frantic messages from her team. She tried to maintain her usual command and control, fielding calls while pacing the small confines of the garage, but something felt different. The familiar rush of corporate crisis management felt muted, distant, like trying to conduct an orchestra while underwater. "Richard, I don't care what Henderson's threatening," she said into her phone, stepping outside where the heat hit her like a wall. "Tell him the meeting is delayed by an hour, and if he doesn't like it, he can find another development partner." She ended the call and immediately dialed her head of operations. "Sarah, I need you to handle the Riverside presentation if I can't make it. Yes, I know it's short notice. Yes, I know you haven't reviewed the environmental impact reports. Figure it out. That's why I pay you 6 figures. But even as she spoke the words, she felt a strange disconnection from them. Through the open garage doors, she could see Mason working with steady concentration, his movements economical and purposeful. No frantic energy, no barked orders into wireless headsets, no visible stress despite the pressure she'd placed on him. When she hung up and returned to the garage, she found Emma had abandoned her drawing corner and was now perched on a stool beside her father, handing him tools with the serious concentration of a surgical assistant. "Wrench, Daddy," Emma said, placing a small tool in Mason's outstretched hand without him having to look. "Thank you, sweetheart. Now, can you get me the blue bottle from the shelf?" Emma scrambled down and retrieved a bottle of some automotive fluid, returning it with obvious pride in her helpfulness. The easy collaboration between them spoke of countless hours spent this way, a father including his daughter in his work, not because he had to, but because he wanted to share his world with her. "Does she always help you like this?" Celeste found herself asking. Mason glanced up from where he was replacing what looked like a critical component. Every day after school and all day during summer, Emma's my best assistant, aren't you, sweetheart? I know all the tools, Emma announced proudly, and I can check the tire pressure, and I know which cars need oil changes just by listening to their engines. She has a better ear for automotive troubles than most mechanics I've trained, Mason said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. Celeste watched this exchange with growing fascination. In her world, children were obstacles to productivity, complications that successful people either avoided entirely or outsourced to nannies and boarding schools. The idea of including a child in one's professional life, of treating their presence as a gift rather than a burden, was completely foreign to her experience. "Don't you worry about her getting hurt?" she asked. "There are sharp tools, heavy machinery." "She knows the safety rules," Mason replied, tightening something that looked critical to her car's continued function. "We've been working together since she was old enough to walk. She's probably safer here than most kids are in their own homes." Emma nodded sagely. "I know never to touch the hot parts, and always wear safety glasses when Daddy's grinding, and never, ever put my fingers where they could get pinched." "Smart girl," Celeste said, and meant it. "Daddy says being smart isn't just about knowing things from books," Emma continued. "It's about knowing how to pay attention, and how to be careful, and how to solve problems when something goes wrong." The observation struck Celeste as surprisingly sophisticated. "And what problems have you solved?" Emma's face lit up. "Last week, Mrs. Henderson's car wouldn't start, and Daddy couldn't figure out why because everything looked perfect. But I noticed that her keys were really heavy with all her keychains, and I remembered Mama used to say too much weight on the keys could hurt the ignition thingy. So Daddy checked it, and that was exactly what was wrong." "Emma saved me hours of diagnostic time," Mason added, his voice warm with affection. "Sometimes a fresh perspective sees what experience misses." As he spoke, Celeste noticed something she hadn't observed before: a thin gold chain around Mason's neck, barely visible beneath his work shirt. And hanging from that chain, worn smooth by constant contact with his skin, was a wedding ring. He caught her looking and didn't try to hide it. "I wear it here now," he said simply, touching the chain through his shirt. "Couldn't bring myself to take it off completely, but couldn't keep it on my finger either. Emma says Mama would want me to keep it close to my heart instead of on my hand, so that's what I do." The artifact spoke of a love so profound that even death couldn't fully end it. Celeste found herself staring at the chain, imagining the conversations between father and daughter about love, loss, and the delicate process of healing while honoring memory. "How do you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Raise her alone, I mean. Run a business. Be a single parent. Don't you ever feel overwhelmed?" Mason paused in his work, considering the question with the same careful attention he gave everything else. "Every day," he said finally, "but overwhelmed isn't the same as defeated. When Maria was dying, she made me promise that Emma would grow up knowing she was loved, that she'd learn to work with her hands, and that she'd understand the difference between having things and being happy. Keeping those promises gives me purpose beyond just surviving each day. But the responsibility, doesn't it ever feel like too much?" "Sure it does. But you know what I've learned? The things that matter most are usually the hardest things to do. Love isn't easy. Raising a child isn't easy. Building something meaningful with your hands isn't easy. But easy things don't change you, don't make you better than you were before." His words hung in the air between them, and Celeste found herself thinking about her own life, how she'd built an empire by taking the path of least emotional resistance, surrounding herself with people who agreed with her, challenges she could solve with money and force of will, problems that required intelligence but not vulnerability. "Daddy," Emma said, tugging on Mason's sleeve. The lady looked sad again. Mason glanced at Celeste, and she realized that indeed something in her expression must have shifted. "I'm not sad," she said automatically. "You don't have to be brave all the time," Emma said with the casual wisdom that seemed to characterize all her observations. Daddy cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping, and that's okay because crying is just feelings trying to get out so they don't stay stuck inside and make you sick. The simple, profound truth of it hit Celeste like a gentle slap. When was the last time she'd allowed herself to feel anything fully: joy, sadness, fear, love? She'd spent so many years maintaining perfect control that she'd forgotten emotions weren't weaknesses to be managed, but essential parts of being human. "Your daughter is very wise," she told Mason. "She gets that from her mother," he replied. And the way he said it with love rather than grief made something inside Celeste's chest ache, with longing for the kind of connection that could survive even death. Her phone buzzed again, but for the first time all day, she didn't immediately answer it. Instead, she watched Mason work, his movements steady and sure, his daughter beside him, learning not just about engines and tools, but about dedication, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of fixing what was broken. The clock read 1:23 p.m. 37 minutes left in the hour she'd demanded. But somehow the approaching deadline felt less urgent than the growing realization that something inside her own heart might need repair even more than her expensive car. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Mason nodded, not pausing in his work. "Are you happy? Really happy, I mean?" He considered this for a long moment. "I'm not sure happy is the right word," he said finally. "I'm grateful. I'm purposeful. I wake up each morning knowing exactly why I'm here and what I need to do. Emma needs me, my customers trust me, and I'm good at what I do. That feels like something better than happiness. It feels like peace." Peace. Celeste rolled the word around in her mind like a foreign concept. She couldn't remember ever feeling truly peaceful, truly still, truly satisfied with simply being where she was, instead of constantly striving to be somewhere else. "I don't think I've ever felt that," she admitted. "It's not something you achieve," Mason said gently. "It's something you accept." Celeste's phone erupted into an extended buzzing fit, the screen lighting up with call after call like an electronic panic attack. She stared at it with growing irritation, not at the callers, but at the device itself, this artifact that had become less a tool of communication and more a leash tethering her to a world that demanded her constant attention. "Aren't you going to answer it?" Emma asked, looking up from where she was carefully organizing Mason's smaller tools by size. "I should," Celeste replied, but made no move to pick up the phone. The calls kept coming. Richard from legal, Sarah from operations, her assistant Jennifer, probably fielding increasingly angry demands from the Riverside development team. Each buzz felt like a small electric shock, a reminder of the dozens of people whose careers depended on her being exactly where she was supposed to be, when she was supposed to be there. Finally, she grabbed the phone and stepped outside again, the desert heat immediately pressing against her silk suit like an unwelcome embrace. "Jennifer, what's the emergency now?" "Ms. Langford, thank God. Henderson is threatening to walk. The environmental assessment team is demanding answers about the wetland impact study. The City Planning Commission wants to reschedule their approval hearing, and if we miss this window, the whole project could be delayed by 6 months. Celeste closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of crisis management settling on her shoulders. This was her element, the place where she proved her worth by solving problems other people couldn't handle, by making decisions that required the kind of cold calculation that had built her fortune. "Patch me through to Henderson," she said. But as she waited for the connection, she found herself watching Mason through the garage window. He was explaining something to Emma, pointing to different parts of her car's engine, his voice too low to hear but his manner patient and educational. Emma listened with complete attention, asking questions that Mason answered with the same seriousness he'd give to a paying customer. "Langford?" Henderson's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with irritation. "Where the hell are you? We've been waiting for 40 minutes. "My car broke down," she said, the excuse feeling strange in her mouth. In 12 years of building her company, she'd never missed a meeting due to something as mundane as mechanical failure. "So rent another car, call a taxi, helicopter in if you have to. This deal is worth $100 million, and I've got 3 other development groups who'd kill for this opportunity. I understand your frustration, Charles, but no, you don't understand. You don't understand that I've got city council members breathing down my neck about environmental concerns. You don't understand that my investors are getting cold feet about the market projections. And you clearly don't understand that being the great Celeste Langford doesn't excuse you from showing up when you promise to show up. The words stung, partly because they were true, partly because Henderson was speaking to her the way she spoke to her own subordinates when they disappointed her. She was getting a taste of her own medicine, and it was bitter. Charles, give me 2 hours. I'll be there, and I'll bring solutions to every concern you've raised. 1 hour, Celeste. After that, I'm taking the meeting with Davidson Development, and you can explain to your board why you lost the biggest deal of the year because your car broke down. He hung up, leaving Celeste staring at her phone in the crushing heat. Around her, the little town of Milbrook went about its quiet business, an elderly man watering flowers outside the diner, 2 children riding bikes in lazy circles, a woman hanging laundry on a line behind the general store. The pace was completely foreign to her experience, as if the entire place existed in a different relationship with time itself. When she returned to the garage, Mason was running what looked like final diagnostics on her car. "How much longer?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "About 15 minutes for this part of the repair," he said without looking up. "But Celeste, I need you to understand something. What I'm doing here is essentially automotive first aid. I'm getting your car stable enough to drive, but it's not fixed. Not really. This cooling system needs complete replacement, and that's a job that takes proper time and proper parts. But I can drive it." "You can drive it. Slowly, carefully, with frequent stops, and knowing that you're risking complete engine failure with every mile." She nodded, accepting the risk because she had no choice. But as she watched him work, she realized she was observing something she'd never seen before, someone who refused to compromise quality even under extreme pressure. "Why don't you just tell me what I want to hear?" she asked suddenly. "You could say it's perfectly fine, let me drive off. And if it breaks down again in 50 miles, that's my problem, not yours." Mason paused in his work, finally looking at her directly. "Because that's not who I am. But it would be easier." "Easier for who?" "You'd be stranded on the highway with a failed engine, possibly in danger. Your trust in me would be destroyed. My reputation in this community would be shot. And Emma would learn that Daddy thinks it's okay to lie to people when telling the truth is inconvenient." He gestured toward his daughter, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing what appeared to be a picture of all 3 of them standing beside her car. "Everything I do, she's watching. Every choice I make teaches her something about how to live in the world. I can't give her much. We don't have money for fancy clothes or expensive toys or college funds. But I can give her the example of a man who does right by people even when it costs him something." The simple moral clarity of it left Celeste momentarily speechless. In her world, ethical considerations were obstacles to be navigated, problems to be solved by legal teams and public relations specialists. The idea of making decisions based purely on what was right, rather than what was profitable or convenient, was almost incomprehensible. "But what if doing the right thing costs you everything?" she asked. "Then at least you lose everything for the right reasons," Mason replied. "My wife used to say that integrity isn't about being perfect, it's about being consistent, being the same person when no one's watching that you are when everyone is." Emma looked up from her drawing. "Mama always said that your reputation is like a garden. It takes a long time to grow, but you can destroy it in one day if you're not careful." "Smart mama," Celeste said, and this time the words came easily. "The smartest," Emma agreed. She said that's why Daddy never lies, even little lies, because lies are like weeds. If you let even tiny ones grow, pretty soon they take over everything beautiful. Celeste's phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. Instead, she found herself studying the scene around her. Mason's steady competence, Emma's innocent wisdom, the cluttered garage that somehow felt more peaceful than her minimalist penthouse ever had. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said to Mason. He nodded, tightening a final connection in her engine. Do you ever regret choosing this life? Small town, modest income, raising a child a London. You ever wonder what you might have accomplished if you'd made different choices? Mason was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. I think about it sometimes, he admitted. I was offered a job with a big automotive company when Emma was a baby. Good money, advancement opportunities, moved to Detroit. Maria and I talked about it for weeks. He closed the hood of her car gently, his movements deliberate and final. But we realized that all those opportunities would have required us to become different people. People who prioritized career advancement over family time, money over community, climbing corporate ladders over raising our daughter ourselves. Maybe we'd have had more things, but we wouldn't have had more life. And now, after losing her, now I know for certain we made the right choice. The 2 years we had together before Emma was born, the 4 years we had as a family, those were rich years, full years. If we'd spent them chasing some other version of success, we'd have missed what mattered most. He wiped his hands on his ever-present rag, signaling that the work was complete. Your car will run, he said. Drive slowly, stop frequently to let the engine cool, and get it to a proper shop as soon as you can. But it'll get you where you need to go. Celeste stared at her repaired Bentley, feeling a complex mix of relief and something else, something that might have been disappointment. The car running meant she could leave, return to her world of boardrooms and hostile negotiations and carefully managed crises. But it also meant leaving this place where time moved differently, where a man wore his deceased wife's ring on a chain around his heart, where a little girl drew pictures of flying cars and asked strangers about their happiness with genuine concern. The clock on the garage wall read 1:57 p.m. Mason had completed the impossible repair with 3 minutes to spare. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt like she was about to lose something she'd only just discovered she wanted. The silence in the garage felt different now, not the uncomfortable quiet of strangers, but the waited pause before something significant happens. Celeste stood beside her repaired Bentley, keys in her hand, knowing she should get in and drive away, but finding herself rooted to the oil-stained concrete floor. Mason was cleaning his tools with the same methodical care he'd shown throughout the repair, each wrench and socket returning to its designated place on the pegboard. Emma had finished her drawing and was now carefully placing it in a manila envelope, handling it like precious cargo. "This is for you," Emma said, approaching Celeste with the envelope, "so you don't forget us." "I won't forget you," Celeste replied, accepting the gift and meaning it more deeply than she'd expected. "Daddy says sometimes when people leave, they get so busy with their important things that they forget about the little things that made them smile." Emma explained. "But I think the little things are important too." The observation hit Celeste with devastating accuracy. How many moments of genuine connection had she forgotten in pursuit of the next deal, the next acquisition, the next quarterly target? How many people had offered her kindness that she'd been too focused to notice? "Your daddy is very wise," she said, crouching down to Emma's eye level, "and so are you." Emma beamed, then did something completely unexpected. She wrapped her small arms around Celeste's neck in a spontaneous hug. The embrace was warm, uncomplicated, and utterly without agenda. When was the last time someone had hugged her simply because they wanted to? "I hope your meetings go really good," Emma whispered against her ear, "and I hope you remember to do something fun today, too." Fun. There was that word again, the concept that seemed so foreign to Celeste's carefully structured existence. She hugged Emma back, breathing in the scent of crayons and childhood innocence, feeling something inside her chest crack open a little wider. When Emma released her and skipped back to her father's side, Celeste stood slowly, aware that Mason was watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. "She doesn't usually warm up to strangers that quickly," he said. "Maybe she senses that I needed a hug more than I realized." Mason smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "Emma has always been good at knowing what people need." Maria used to say she was born with her heart on the outside, feeling everything more deeply than most people. Like her father? Maybe. Maria balanced us both out. She was the steady one, the one who kept us grounded when Emma's sensitivity and my stubbornness threatened to take us too far in either direction. He moved to a small refrigerator in the corner of the garage and retrieved a metal lunchbox, the kind construction workers and mechanics had carried for generations. But when he opened it, Celeste was surprised to see not sandwiches and chips, but carefully prepared containers of what looked like homemade food. "Emma, come eat lunch," he called. "But what about Miss Celeste? She should eat too." Mason looked at Celeste questioningly. "Have you eaten today?" The question made her realize she hadn't just her morning protein shake, consumed while reviewing overnight emails. Her schedule had been too packed to accommodate something as basic as food, another small sacrifice on the altar of productivity. "I don't usually eat lunch," she said. "That explains why you look so pale," Emma observed with her characteristic directness. "Daddy says not eating makes people grumpy and tired and not able to think good." Before Celeste could protest, Mason was retrieving another container from what appeared to be a well-stocked collection. "Maria's recipe," he explained, opening it to reveal some kind of Mexican rice dish that smelled incredible. "I make big batches on Sundays, so Emma and I have real food all week instead of fast food or frozen dinners." He handed her a plastic fork and gestured toward the wooden bench outside. "It's not fancy, but it's good." Celeste found herself sitting on the bench in the desert heat, eating homemade food from a container that had been prepared with love rather than purchased with money. The rice was perfect, savory and complex, with flavors that spoke of tradition and careful attention. Emma chattered beside her about her favorite foods, her least favorite vegetables, and her father's skill in the kitchen. "Daddy learned to cook from Mama," Emma explained between bites. "She said that knowing how to feed people is one of the most important ways to show love." "Your mama taught him well," Celeste said, and meant it. "She taught him lots of things. How to braid my hair, how to sing lullabies, how to make me feel better when I'm scared during thunderstorms." Emma's voice grew softer. "Sometimes I miss her so much, it feels like my chest is too tight. But then I remember something she taught Daddy to do for me, and it's like she's still here a little bit." The simple profundity of grief, expressed through a child's words, made Celeste's throat tight. She looked at Mason, who was listening to his daughter with the same careful attention he'd given her car's engine. "Do you mind me asking how you manage it?" she asked quietly. "The loss, the single parenting, the balance of everything." Mason was quiet for a moment, looking out at the main street where a few townspeople moved at their unhurried pace. "The first year after Maria died, I didn't manage it at all," he said finally. "I was angry all the time, exhausted, overwhelmed. Emma would ask me questions about her mother, and I'd either cry or snap at her because the pain was too fresh, too big to handle." He paused, taking a sip from a thermos that smelled like coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "But Emma kept being Emma, asking questions, needing things, living her life like children do. And slowly I realized that my grief was making me forget the most important part of what Maria and I had built together. Emma needed me to be her father, not just someone surviving in the same house with her." "How did you find your way back?" "Maria's recipe box," he said, nodding toward the garage where Celeste could now see a small wooden box sitting on a shelf beside his tools. "About 6 months after she died, Emma asked if we could make Mama's enchiladas for dinner. I'd never cooked anything more complicated than scrambled eggs, but Maria had written down all her recipes in this little box she'd kept since we got married." His voice grew warm with memory. "That first attempt was a disaster. Burned the sauce, overcooked the tortillas, forgot half the ingredients. But Emma ate every bite and told me it was the best dinner ever because it reminded her of Mama. And I realized that keeping Maria's love alive meant more than just missing Herit, meant continuing the things she'd started, the traditions she'd wanted to pass down." He gestured toward the recipe box, this artifact that had become a bridge between past and present, loss and healing. Every recipe in there has notes in Maria's handwriting, not just ingredients and instructions, but memories. Emma loves extra cheese on this one. Make double batch for church potluck. Mason's favorite comfort food when he's stressed. It's like having conversations with her every time I cook. Celeste found herself staring at the small wooden box, imagining the love contained within its simple boundaries. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "It taught me something important," Mason continued. "Grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry differently. Instead of letting it make me bitter, I could let it make me better. More patient, more grateful, more present with Emma, because I know how precious and fragile our time together really is." Emma had finished eating and was now lying on her back in a patch of shade, looking up at the clouds. "Daddy," she called without moving. "Remember when Mama used to say that clouds were her way of sending us pictures from heaven?" "I remember, sweetheart. I think that one looks like a car with wings, just like the one I drew for Miss Celeste." Celeste looked up at the cloud Emma was pointing to, and with the generous interpretation required for cloud watching with children, she could indeed see something that might be a vehicle with wing-like appendages. "Maybe that's your Mama approving of your artwork," she suggested. Emma sat up, eyes bright with delight. "Really? You think Mama can see my drawings?" Mason caught Celeste's eye and nodded slightly, a small gesture of gratitude for playing along with his daughter's need to feel connected to her lost mother. "I think your Mama sees everything you do," Celeste said, surprised by how easily the words came. "And I think she's very proud of the kind, creative, thoughtful little girl you've become." Emma beamed, then scrambled to her feet and ran to her father. "Can we make Mama's chocolate cookies tonight? I want to share them with Miss Celeste before she leaves." "Sweetheart, Miss Celeste has to go to her important meeting." "Actually," Celeste interrupted, the words coming out before she'd fully formed the thought, "my meeting isn't until later. I could stay for a little while longer." The lie came so naturally she barely recognized it as one. But as soon as she spoke, she realized it wasn't entirely falsish, was choosing to redefine what constituted an emergency, what deserved her immediate attention, what mattered most in this particular moment. Mason looked surprised, but pleased. "Are you sure? I don't want to make you late for something important." "This is important," she said, and meant it completely. So they spent the next hour doing something Celeste had never experienced, participating in the casual rhythm of a family's afternoon. Emma showed her the proper way to measure flour, level off the top with a knife. Mason explained the difference between baking soda and baking powder, and together they created something beautiful and edible from simple ingredients and shared effort. The kitchen behind the garage was small but perfectly organized, every surface clean and everything in its designated place. Photos covered the refrigerator. Emma, at various ages, family gatherings, candid moments of joy and celebration. And prominently displayed was a professional portrait of Maria Reyes, her dark eyes warm with laughter, her smile capturing the spirit that had obviously infused this little family with love. "She was beautiful," Celeste said, studying the photo while cookies baked in the oven. "Inside and out," Mason agreed. But what made her special wasn't how she looked, it was how she made everyone around her feel seen and valued. She never met a stranger, never judged anyone, always found something good to say about even difficult people. "Mama said that everyone has a story that would make you cry if you knew it," Emma added, licking cookie dough from her fingers. "So she always tried to be extra kind to everyone, just in case they were having the worst day of their life." The philosophy struck Celeste like a gentle revelation. How many people had she dismissed, intimidated, or simply ignored because she was too focused on her own goals to consider their humanity? How many opportunities for connection had she missed because she'd never learned to see past her own ambitions? When the cookies came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Emma insisted on packaging some in a small tin for Celeste to take with her. "So you'll have something sweet when you get home," she explained. As they sat around the small kitchen table, sharing warm cookies and cold milk, Celeste felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The simple pleasure of being present in a moment without agenda, without goal, without the pressure to be anywhere else or anyone else. "This is nice," she said aloud. "What is?" Emma asked. "This, sitting here with you and your daddy, eating cookies, not worrying about the next thing I have to do. I'd forgotten how good it feels to just be somewhere." Mason and Emma exchanged a look, and Emma giggled. "Daddy, I think Miss Celeste is learning how to have fun." "I think you might be right," Mason replied, his smile gentle and knowing. But even as Celeste savored the moment, her phone sat silent on the table between them, and she knew that her real world was waiting impatient, demanding, and ultimately unavoidable. As the afternoon light began to slant through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, Celeste found herself helping Emma organize her art supplier task that would have seemed impossibly mundane just hours earlier, but now felt strangely soothing. There was something meditative about sorting crayons by color, arranging markers by size, creating order from the beautiful chaos of a child's creativity. Emma was explaining her artistic process with the seriousness of a museum curator. "I always draw the people first, because they're the most important part. Then I draw the place where they are. Then I add the things that make them happy, like flowers or sunshine or ice cream." "What makes people happy in your drawings?" Celeste asked, genuinely curious. "Mostly being together," Emma replied without hesitation. "Like, look at this one." She pulled out a drawing that showed stick figures holding hands in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. "This is the Patterson family. They were really sad when their grandpa died, so I drew them all together with their grandpa watching from heaven, and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears when I gave it to her." Emma rummaged through her portfolio and produced another drawing, this one showing a little girl figure standing between two adult figures, all three of them smiling. But there was something different about this one, something that made Celeste look closer. "Who is this?" she asked. Emma's cheeks flushed pink. That's me and Daddy, and..." She glanced toward where Mason was visible through the doorway, now working under the hood of the red pickup truck. "I drew it after you got here. Sometimes I draw things I wish could happen." The artifact was startling in its innocent hope. Emma had drawn Celeste into their family portrait, imagining a future where the strange, sad lady in the expensive suit might somehow belong in their world of homemade cookies and afternoon hugs. "It's beautiful," Celeste managed, her throat unexpectedly tight. "Do you think it's silly?" Emma asked with the vulnerability of someone sharing their deepest wish. "Not at all. I think it's one of the most wonderful things anyone has ever drawn." Emma beamed, then carefully placed the drawing back in her collection. "Daddy says that sometimes when you wish for something with your whole heart, the universe finds a way to make it happen. Not always the way you expect, but in the way that's best for everyone. Your daddy is full of wisdom. He learned it from Mama. She always said that love doesn't end when someone goes to heaven, it just changes shape and finds new ways to grow." As if summoned by their conversation, Mason appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on his rag. "How are my favorite artists doing?" "Miss Celeste helped me organize all my supplies, and I showed her my family drawings," Emma reported proudly. Mason's gaze lingered on the portfolio for a moment, and Celeste wondered if he'd seen the drawing that included her. If he had, his expression didn't reveal what he thought about his daughter's hopeful imagination. "Emma, why don't you start gathering up your things? It's almost time for your reading hour." "Can Miss Celeste stay for reading hour? I'm reading a book about a princess who builds bridges instead of living in towers." Mason looked at Celeste questioningly, and she realized she was at a crossroads she hadn't seen approaching. Her phone had been quiet for the past hour, but she knew that silence was temporary. Her real world was waiting Henderson's ultimatum, the Riverside Development Project, the hundreds of employees and millions of dollars that depended on her being exactly where she was supposed to be. But Emma was looking at her with such hopeful expectation, and the idea of leaving this warm pocket of peace felt suddenly unbearable. "I'd love to hear about the bridge-building princess," she heard herself say. So they settled in the small living area behind the garage, Emma curled between her father and Celeste on a worn but comfortable couch, a children's book open across their laps. The story was simple but profound, about a princess who realized that walls and towers kept her isolated from the very people she was meant to serve. So she learned to build bridges instead, connections that allowed love and help to flow in both directions. As Emma read aloud with the careful concentration of someone still mastering the skill, Celeste found herself thinking about the walls she'd built around her own life. Her penthouse apartment with its carefully controlled access, her office with its intimidating layout designed to keep visitors at a disadvantage. Her entire existence structured to maintain distance, to project invulnerability, to ensure that no one could get close enough to hurt her. But sitting here, listening to a 6-year-old read about the transformative power of connection, she began to understand that her walls hadn't just kept pain out, they'd kept love out too. "What did you think of the story?" Emma asked when she'd finished the last page. "I think the princess was very brave," Celeste replied. "It's scary to tear down walls when you've spent so long building them. But she was happier after, right? Even though it was scary?" "Much happier." Emma nodded sagely. "Sometimes the best things are scary at first, like when I learned to ride my bike without training wheels. I was scared I'd fall, but Daddy said falling is just part of learning, and now I can ride all the way to the library by myself." "Emma's quite the philosopher," Mason said, his voice warm with pride. "She gets it honestly," Celeste replied, looking at him directly. "You've both given me a lot to think about today." "Like what?" The question was gentle, without pressure, but it opened a door she hadn't realized she was ready to walk through. "Like what it means to actually live, instead of just achieving," she said slowly. "Like how love can be more valuable than money, community more important than competition, like how taking care of people might matter more than taking advantage of them." Mason was quiet for a moment, his attention focused on Emma, who had curled up against his side and was starting to look drowsy in the afternoon warmth. "Those are hard lessons for someone in your position to learn," he said finally. "Why?" "Because everything about your world probably rewards the opposite behavior. Success measured by how much you can accumulate, how many people you can outmaneuver, how efficiently you can eliminate obstacles, including human ones." His words weren't accusatory, just observational, but they hit her with devastating accuracy. "You're right," she admitted. "I've spent 12 years building a life that measures worth in terms of profit margins and market share. I've fired thousands of people, destroyed competitors, made decisions that prioritized shareholder value over human cost. And until today, I thought that was not just acceptable, but admirable. What changed?" She looked down at Emma, now sleeping peacefully between them, her small hand still clutching the book about the bridge-building princess. "Watching you with her," she said softly. "Seeing what it looks like when someone's primary goal is caring for another person instead of conquering them. Realizing that all my success has made me incredibly wealthy and incredibly alone." "Loneliness is fixable," Mason said gently. "Is it? When you've spent so many years pushing people away, when you've built a reputation based on being ruthless and untouchable, when everyone who works for you is afraid of you, and everyone who doesn't work for you wants something from you." "It starts with one person," Mason replied. "One genuine connection. One moment when you choose to be real instead of powerful." As if responding to their conversation, Emma stirred in her sleep and mumbled something that sounded like flying cars. "She's dreaming about the picture she drew for you," Mason whispered. "She's an amazing little girl." "She is, and she sees something in you that maybe you haven't seen in yourself yet." "What's that?" "Someone worth caring about. Someone who might care back if given the chance." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Celeste felt her phone vibrate against her leg, a reminder that her other life was still there, still demanding her attention, still pulling her back toward the world of boardrooms and hostile negotiations. But for the first time in her adult life, she found herself wondering whether that world was worth returning to, whether the empire she'd built was really a kingdom or just a very expensive prison. Emma shifted again, and this time her eyes fluttered open. Did I fall asleep? Just for a little while, sweetheart, Mason said. Emma looked around, seemingly surprised to find Celeste still there. You stayed, she said with obvious delight. I stayed, Celeste confirmed. Does that mean you like us? The question was so direct, so innocent, so free of any adult calculation that it took Celeste's breath away. Yes, she said simply. I like you very much. Emma's smile was radiant. I like you too. I think you're going to be happy once you learn how. The spell was broken by the sharp buzz of Celeste's phononaut, a call this time, but a text from her assistant that made her blood freeze. Henderson, walking in 5 minutes if you don't call. Also, FYI saw, news report about Milbrook development. Residents organizing protest. Bad optics. Celeste stared at the message, feeling reality crash back into the peaceful bubble she'd been inhabiting, Milbrook. The name of this town, this place that had begun to feel like sanctuary, now blazing across her phone screen in the context of corporate conquest. I need to make a call, she said, standing abruptly. Mason and Emma watched as she stepped outside, her fingers already dialing Henderson's number with mechanical precision. Charles, it's Celeste. I'm on my way, give me 30 minutes. About damn time, but we have a bigger problem now. The environmental group leaked our plans to the local media. There's a news crew setting up in the town square, and apparently the whole population is mobilizing to fight the development. Celeste's gaze swept across Milbrook's quiet main street, the diner where she'd seen the elderly man watering flowers, the general store with its handwritten signs, the library with children's artwork in the windows. All of it marked for demolition in the development plans sitting in her briefcase. How bad is the resistance? Bad enough. They're calling it corporate rape of small-town America and questioning our environmental impact studies. We need damage control and we need it now. Get here, Celeste. This deal is hanging by a thread. She hung up and stood in the desert heat, her mind racing through crisis management protocols she could implement in her sleep. Media spin, legal pressure, strategic community outreach, financial incentives for key stakeholders. She had a dozen tools for breaking down exactly this kind of opposition. But as she formulated her battle plan, she heard Emma's laughter from inside the garage, followed by Mason's gentle voice, explaining something about engine compression ratios. The sound stopped her cold. She walked back into the garage like a woman in a trance, seeing it now with different eyes. This wasn't just a small-town auto shop. This was ground zero of a community she was planning to destroy. Mason, she said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. Can I ask you something? He looked up from where he was showing Emma how to check tire pressure. Of course. What would you do if someone wanted to buy this place? Tear it down and build something bigger? Mason's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. That's an oddly specific question. Celeste felt her professional mask slipping back into place, the familiar armor of corporate detachment. Just curious about how attached people get to places like this. Places like this? There was an edge to his voice now. You mean places where families have built their lives for generations? Where everyone knows everyone else's name? Where children can walk to school safely? Where neighbors help each other through hard times? I meant small towns, she said weakly. This isn't just a small town, Emma piped up, apparently unaware of the growing tension. This is our home. Daddy was born here, and Mama was born here, and I was born here, and my grandpa built this garage with his own hands, and… Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go organize your art supplies again? Mason's voice was gentle with his daughter, but his eyes remained fixed on Celeste with growing suspicion. After Emma skipped away, Mason straightened slowly, and Celeste realized that the easy camaraderie of the past few hours was evaporating like steam from her overheated engine. What aren't you telling me? He asked quietly. Celeste felt the weight of her briefcase against her leg, heavy with legal documents and environmental assessments and architectural plans that would transform Milbrook from a living community into a luxury resort playground for people exactly like her. The artifact of her corporate ruthlessness, sitting there like an unexploded bomb in the middle of their newfound connection. "I should go," she said instead of answering. "Should you, or do you want to?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Want. When was the last time she'd made a decision based on what she wanted, rather than what she should do for strategic advantage? "It doesn't matter what I want," she said automatically. "Why not?" "Because I have responsibilities, people depending on me, obligations." "To who?" "To my company, my shareholders, my employees." "What about to yourself?" She stared at him, this man who had somehow seen through her armor, to ask the questions she'd been avoiding for years. "I can't afford to think about myself." "Can't afford to, or don't know how to?" Before she could answer, her phone rang again. This time it was Richard from legal, and she could hear the panic in his voice before she even answered. "Celeste, we have a problem. The EPA is reviewing our environmental impact assessment for Milbrook, and there are questions about the wetland classifications. If they challenge our findings, this project could be tied up in court for years." She found herself looking out the garage doors at the small town that she now knew was populated by real people with real lives, people like Mason and Emma, people who watered flowers and drew pictures and made homemade cookies and believed in the simple philosophy that everyone deserved kindness. "I'll handle it," she said into the phone. "How?" "Henderson wants answers in 20 minutes. I said I'll handle it." She hung up and realized that Mason had been listening to her side of the conversation. The warmth that had characterized his interactions with her all day was gone, replaced by a wariness that made her stomach clench. "Environmental impact assessments," he said. "Wetland classifications. You're not just curious about development, are you?" Celeste felt everything crashing down around her, careful distance she maintained between her professional and personal life. The compartmentalization that allowed her to make ruthless decisions without considering their human cost, the wall between her corporate identity and her heart. "I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been lying to us all day. That while Emma was drawing pictures of you as part of our family, you were planning to destroy our home." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire, impossible to clear, devastating in its accuracy. "It's not that simple," she said desperately. "Isn't it?" Mason's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath the calm. "You came here demanding service, threatening my livelihood if I didn't perform on your schedule. You let my daughter trust you, care about you, dream about you staying in our lives, and the whole time you knew that you were here to evaluate the town you're planning to eliminate." "I didn't know," she protested. "I mean, I knew about the development project, but I didn't know this was Milbrook until..." "Until when?" "Until you'd gotten what you needed from us." Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in her father's voice. "Daddy, why do you sound upset?" Mason's expression immediately softened for his daughter, but his body remained rigid with barely controlled anger. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Miss Celeste just needs to leave for her meeting now." "But she was going to stay for dinner," Emma said, confusion clear in her voice. "You promised we could make Mama's enchiladas." The innocent reminder of their afternoon plans, made in a moment when Celeste had allowed herself to imagine belonging somewhere, being wanted for who she was rather than what she could provide, felt like a knife twisting in her chest. "Plans change," Mason said quietly. Emma looked between them, her 6-year-old intuition clearly picking up on the emotional undercurrents. Did Miss Celeste do something bad? The question struck Celeste like lightning. Had she done something bad? By the standards of her corporate world, she was doing exactly what she was supposed to do, pursuing a profitable development opportunity, conducting due diligence, managing stakeholder concerns. She was being a successful CEO. But standing in this garage, looking at Emma's confused and hurt expression, watching Mason's careful distance where hours before there had been growing warmth, she realized that corporate success and human decency might not be compatible after all. "I'm sorry," she said, the words coming out broken and inadequate. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" Emma asked. "I don't understand why everyone is acting weird." Mason crouched down to his daughter's eye level. his voice gentle despite the tension radiating from his shoulders. "Remember how we talked about how sometimes adults have to make choices that hurt people even when they don't want to?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Miss Celeste has a job that might require her to do something that would hurt our town. She didn't tell us about it, and now we need to figure out what that means." Emma's eyes widened as she processed this information. Then she turned to Celeste with the direct, uncompromising gaze of childhood. "Are you going to hurt us?" she asked simply. The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Celeste looked at this little girl who had welcomed her with unconditional kindness, who had drawn her into family portraits, who had asked about her happiness with genuine concern. She looked at Mason, who had shown her what it meant to live with integrity, to put love before profit, to measure success in terms of human connection rather than financial accumulation. And she looked at her briefcase, sitting innocently beside her repaired car, containing the documents that would transform this place of refuge into another luxury development designed for people who had never learned the difference between having things and being happy. "I don't know," she whispered, and realized it was the first completely honest thing she'd said all day. The silence that followed Celeste's admission felt like the moment before, thunder charged with electricity and the promise of storm. Emma's eyes filled with tears she was too young to understand, while Mason's face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a man who had learned not to show his wounds to strangers. "I think you should go," he said quietly. Celeste nodded, knowing he was right, but feeling like she was being torn in half. She gathered her purse, her briefcase full of damning documents, the tin of cookies Emma had packed for her artifacts of the different lives she was trying to reconcile. "For what it's worth," she said, pausing at the garage door, "today was the most real I've felt in years." "Reality is a luxury people like you can't afford," Mason replied, his voice devoid of warmth. "It interferes with business." The words stung because they were true. She walked to her Bentley, started the engine that Mason had coaxed back to life, and drove toward the meeting that would seal Milbrook's fate. But as she reached the edge of town, she found herself pulling over beside a weathered sign that proclaimed, "Milbrook, founded 1952, home of the Desert Wildcats, population 847. She got out of the car and walked toward the sign, reading the smaller text that told the story of a community built by returning World War II veterans who had wanted to create a place where families could thrive away from the chaos of big cities. Names were listed of founding families, Patterson, Henderson, Reyes among them. Mason's grandfather had been one of the original settlers, part of a generation that had believed in building something lasting, something beautiful, something worth preserving. The artifact of the town's founding plaque represented everything her development project would destroy, not just buildings and businesses, but generational connections, community memory, the carefully tended relationships that made a place home rather than just a location. Her phone buzzed with another urgent message, but this time she ignored it. Instead, she walked down Main Street, really seeing it for the first time. The diner wasn't just a restaurant, it was where teenagers had first dates, where elderly couples celebrated anniversaries, where travelers like herself could find refuge when their carefully controlled lives broke down. The general store wasn't just a business, it was where 3 generations of the same family had served their neighbors, where Emma probably bought her art supplies, where Mason picked up prescriptions when she was sick. The library drew her attention particularly, such a small building to contain so much hope. Through the windows, she could see children's programs advertised, adult literacy classes, computer training for seniors, a community's determination to grow and learn despite limited resources. And everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of the connections that made this place special. Hand-painted signs advertising local services, flower boxes maintained by volunteers, a community bulletin board filled with announcements about church suppers, school plays, neighbors helping neighbors through difficult times. This was what she'd spent the day experiencing, not just Mason and Emma's kindness, but their embeddedness in something larger than themselves. They weren't isolated individuals pursuing personal success, but threads in a tapestry of mutual care and shared responsibility. Her phone rang, insistently. Henderson, no doubt wondering where she was, what her strategy would be for overcoming community resistance, how quickly they could push through the legal and environmental challenges that threatened their timeline. She answered without enthusiasm. "Charles, where the hell are you? The media circus is getting worse, and I've got investors breathing down my neck about negative publicity. I'm in Milbrook." "Good. What's your assessment? How do we neutralize the opposition?" Neutralize. The word felt obscene now, loaded with implications of treating human concerns as tactical problems to be solved, rather than legitimate voices to be heard. "It's complicated," she said. "No, it's not. It's business. These people want compensation above fair market value. We negotiate. They want relocation assistance. We provide it. They want environmental guarantees. We make cosmetic adjustments to the impact study. This is Development 101, Celeste." She found herself standing in front of the auto shop, where Mason was probably explaining to Emma why the nice lady had turned out to be not so nice after all. The garage doors were closed now, and she could imagine them inside, Emma crying, while Mason tried to comfort her with the knowledge that sometimes adults make choices that hurt innocent people. "What if we chose a different location?" she heard herself say. "What? There are other sites, other communities that might welcome development. Why does it have to be here?" Henderson's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Because here is perfect. Scenic desert location, proximity to major transportation routes, minimal political opposition until today, and most importantly, we can acquire the land for pennies on the dollar because these people don't understand what they're sitting on. Maybe they understand exactly what they're sitting on, and that's why they don't want to sell." Jesus, Celeste, what happened to you out there? Did you go native on me? The accusation hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. Had she gone native, or had she simply remembered what it felt like to be human? "I'm saying maybe we should consider whether maximum profit is worth destroying a community that's taken 70 years to build. Since when do you care about community? You've spent your entire career eliminating communities, firing entire departments, shuttering regional offices, relocating operations to cheaper markets. When did Celeste Langford develop a conscience?" The question hung in the desert air like heat shimmer, distorting everything she thought she knew about herself. When had she developed a conscience? This morning when Emma asked if she had children? This afternoon when Mason explained the recipe box that kept his wife's love alive? This evening when a 6-year-old asked her directly if she was going to hurt them? "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said finally. "Good. And Celeste? Whatever sentimental nonsense you picked up in that little town, leave it there. We have $100 million deal to close." She hung up and stood in the gathering dusk, watching lights come on in windows throughout Milbrook. Kitchen lights where families were sharing dinner, porch lights welcoming people home, the warm glow of connection and belonging that she'd tasted for a few precious hours. Her briefcase felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of what it contained and what it would cost. Not just the legal documents and environmental assessments, but the architectural plans that would replace Mason's garage with a luxury spa, Emma's elementary school with a golf course, the community center with a private club for resort guests. She thought about Emma's drawing the family portrait that had included her, the innocent hope that maybe the sad lady in the expensive suit could find a place to belong. She thought about Mason's steady integrity, his refusal to compromise quality even under pressure, his gentle wisdom about grief and healing and what it meant to build a life around love instead of achievement. And she thought about herself, not the corporate shark who intimidated competitors and maximized shareholder value, but the woman who had spent an afternoon learning to have fun, who had helped a little girl organize art supplies, who had shared homemade cookies and felt, for the first time in years, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Henderson, threatening to pull out completely if you don't show in 15 minutes. Need your ETA." Celeste stared at the message, then at the garage where Mason and Emma were undoubtedly trying to understand how someone they'd cared about could turn out to be the architect of their destruction. She had 15 minutes to decide who she was going to be, the ruthless CEO who had built an empire by never letting emotions interfere with profit, or the woman who had discovered that all her success meant nothing if it came at the cost of her humanity. 15 minutes to choose between the life she'd built and the life she'd glimpsed, between corporate conquest and human connection, between the safe distance of financial achievement and the terrifying vulnerability of actually caring about people. She got back in her Bentley, started the engine, and drove toward the meeting that would determine not just Milbrook's fate, but her own. But as she reached the town limits, she found herself slowing down, her foot growing heavy on the brake pedal, her hands tight on the steering wheel as she approached the crossroads that would define the rest of her life. In her rearview mirror, the lights of Milbrook grew smaller but somehow brighter, like stars she was just beginning to learn how to navigate by. And in her briefcase, the development documents felt like an anchor, dragging her toward a destiny she was no longer sure she wanted to claim. The Riverside Conference Center parking lot was full of luxury vehicles and news vans, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers, reaching for signals that would broadcast Milbrook's fate to the world. Celeste sat in her idling Bentley, staring at the building where Henderson and his investors waited, with the contracts that would transform her from a woman who had shared cookies with a 6-year-old into the destroyer of that child's home. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. The corporate machine was in full crisis mode, everyone demanding her attention, her decisions, her ability to solve problems that threatened profit margins and development timelines. This was her element, the high-stakes negotiations where she proved her worth by outmaneuvering opponents and finding paths to victory that others couldn't see. But as she reached for the door handle, her hand trembled, actually trembled, something that hadn't happened since her first boardroom presentation 15 years ago. The car keys felt impossibly heavy in her palm, this artifact that represented her choice between two worlds, two versions of herself, two completely different definitions of what constituted success. She could drive away, abandon the deal, disappoint Henderson, face the professional consequences of putting human concerns above corporate profits. Or she could walk through those conference center doors and do what she'd always done, win at any cost. She thought about Emma's innocent question, "Are you going to hurt us?" The memory of those trusting brown eyes made her chest tight with something that might have been grief for the person she was about to stop being. Her phone rang. Jennifer, her assistant, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Miss Langford, thank God. Henderson is threatening to call off the entire deal. The media is asking about environmental cover-ups. The board is demanding answers about the negative publicity. Where are you?" "I'm here," Celeste said, looking at the conference center like it was a courthouse where she was about to be sentenced. "Thank God. Conference room B, 3rd floor. Henderson wants to start immediately." "Jennifer?" Celeste's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Yes, ma'am? Do you ever think about the people our developments displace?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Ma'am, are you feeling all right? You sound different." Different. The word echoed in her mind as she ended the call. She was different. The woman who had stormed into Mason's garage, demanding impossible service, was not the same person who had learned to organize art supplies and listen to children's stories and understand that integrity meant being consistent, regardless of who was watching. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against asphalt that radiated the day's heat back into the desert evening. The conference center's lobby was all glass and steel, designed to project corporate power and intimidate anyone who might challenge the decisions made within its walls. So different from Mason's garage with its warm clutter of family photos and handmade drawings. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Each floor that passed took her further from the person she'd been becoming and closer to the person she'd always been: ruthless, calculating, emotionally disconnected from the human cost of her choices. Conference room B was exactly what she'd expected. A polished table surrounded by men in expensive suits, legal documents spread like battle plans. The air thick with cigarette smoke and barely contained aggression. Henderson stood at the head of the table, his face red with frustration, while various investors and lawyers clustered around tablets showing news coverage of the Milbrook protests. "About damn time," Henderson snapped as she entered. "We've got a PR nightmare on our hands, and every minute we delay gives these small-town activists more time to organize." Celeste took her seat at the table, placing her briefcase carefully beside her chair. Inside that leather case were the documents that would seal Milbrook's fate: environmental assessments, legal briefs, financial projections, architectural plans. Everything needed to transform a living community into a luxury playground for people who had never learned the difference between having things and being happy. "What's our situation?" she asked, falling automatically into corporate crisis mode. "Bad and getting worse," replied Davidson, Henderson's head of development. "The environmental groups are questioning our wetland classifications. The Historical Society is claiming the town has cultural significance, and somehow they've gotten a sympathetic news crew to frame this as corporate bullying versus small-town America. How do we counter their narrative?" "Same way we always do," Henderson said, lighting another cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. "We outspend them, out-lawyer them, and outweight them. Small communities don't have the resources for extended legal battles. We make it expensive enough to fight us, and they'll eventually take whatever settlement we offer." As he spoke, Celeste found herself remembering Mason's quiet dignity, his refusal to compromise quality even under pressure, his determination to do right by people even when it cost him something. The contrast between Henderson's cynical calculation and Mason's principled integrity was stark enough to make her stomach turn. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" she asked. "Depends on how hard they fight," said Morrison, the lead attorney. "If we can isolate the key property owners and pressure them individually, we might wrap this up in 6 months. If they organize effectively and bring in outside legal support, it could drag on for years. Either way, we win eventually," Henderson added. "These people don't understand how deep our pockets are or how patient we can be when there's this much money at stake." Celeste nodded, playing her expected role while something inside her chest grew colder with each passing moment. This was the world she'd built, the empire she commanded. Place where human concerns were obstacles to be overcome, where community bonds were weaknesses to be exploited, where people like Mason and Emma were merely inconveniences standing between profit and progress. "What about alternative sites?" she asked suddenly. The room fell silent. Henderson stared at her like she'd suggested burning money for warmth. "Alternative sites. Other locations for the development. Places where we might face less community resistance." "Why would we want less resistance?" Henderson's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Resistance drives down land prices. The more these people fight us, the cheaper we can acquire their property when they finally give up. I'm thinking about public relations costs, legal expenses, timeline delays, all of which are negligible compared to the profit potential of this specific location," Davidson interrupted. "Celeste, we've been planning this development for 2 years. The site surveys, environmental assessments, architectural designs, everything is specific to Milbrook. Starting over somewhere else would cost us millions and delay launch by at least 18 months. Henderson leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What's really going on here? This morning you were ready to steamroll anyone who got in our way. Now you're talking about alternative sites and worrying about community resistance. What happened during your car breakdown?" All eyes in the room focused on her, waiting for an explanation she wasn't sure she could give. How do you tell a room full of corporate sharks that you've discovered the existence of your own conscience? How do you explain that a few hours in a small-town garage had taught you more about what mattered in life than decades of business school and boardroom victories? "I'm just being thorough," she said finally. "Thorough?" Henderson's laugh was harsh. "Celeste, you've built your reputation on being decisive, on cutting through obstacles that stop other developers. Don't tell me you're going soft over a few protesters and some bad press. The accusation hung in the room like smoke, and Celeste realized she was at the moment of truth, the point where she would either embrace the person she'd been becoming or retreat into the safe armor of corporate ruthlessness. She reached for her briefcase, her hand steady now despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. The car keys in her pocket felt warm against her leg, reminding her that she still had choices, that it wasn't too late to drive back toward the lights of Milbrook and the possibility of becoming someone worthy of Emma's trust and Mason's respect. "Let me show you what I found during my site visit," she said, opening the briefcase that contained either Milbrook's salvation or its destruction. "What I found," Celeste said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is that we've made a fundamental error in our assessment of this project." She reached into her briefcase, but instead of pulling out the development contracts, she withdrew Emma's drawing the colorful crayon portrait of a flying car, created by a little girl who believed that kindness could solve any problem. "This is what I found in Milbrook," she continued, placing the drawing on the polished conference table where it looked absurdly out of place among the legal documents and financial projections. "I found a community built on relationships that have taken 70 years to develop. I found a place where people know each other's names, where children can walk safely to school, where neighbors help each other through difficult times." Henderson stared at the drawing like it was a piece of evidence in a crime he couldn't quite comprehend. "Celeste, what the hell?" "I found a 6-year-old girl who welcomed a stranger with unconditional kindness," she interrupted, her voice growing more confident. "I found a man who has built his life around integrity, who refuses to compromise quality even under extreme pressure, who measures success by how well he cares for the people he loves." She stood up, no longer able to remain seated while delivering what she knew would be the most important speech of her professional life. "And I found myself asking a question I haven't considered in 15 years of corporate success. What if we're wrong? What if the value of a place isn't measured by its profit potential, but by the quality of life it provides to the people who call it home?" "This is ridiculous," Davidson muttered, but Henderson held up a hand to silence him. "Go on," Henderson said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're not just acquiring land," Celeste continued. "We're destroying a community. We're displacing families who have lived here for generations, eliminating small businesses that serve as gathering places for neighbors, tearing down the social fabric that makes this place special." She reached into her briefcase again, this time pulling out the development contracts, the environmental assessments, all the carefully prepared documents that would legally authorize Milbrook's transformation into another luxury resort. "These papers give us the right to build our development," she said, holding them up. "But they don't give us the right to destroy something beautiful and irreplaceable in the process." "Celeste," Henderson's voice was sharp with warning, "you're talking about walking away from a $100 million deal because of sentimental nonsense about small-town community values. I'm talking about recognizing that some things are worth more than money." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war against everything the corporate development world stood for. Around the table, men who had spent their careers treating communities as obstacles to be overcome stared at her like she'd announced her intention to give up capitalism entirely. "You've lost your mind," Morrison said flatly. "This is business, not a charity project. We have investors, shareholders, contractual obligations, and we have choices," Celeste cut him off. "We can choose to find alternative locations. We can choose to develop properties where our investment strengthens communities instead of destroying them. We can choose to build our wealth without crushing other people's dreams." Henderson stood up slowly, his face dark with barely controlled fury. "Let me make something very clear, Celeste. This deal represents 18 months of planning, millions of dollars in preparatory investment, and contractual commitments to investors who don't give a damn about your sudden attack of conscience. If you walk away from this table, you're not just sabotaging one development project, you're destroying your reputation in this industry. Maybe that's a reputation worth destroying." The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought, but as soon as she spoke them, she knew they were true. Her reputation was built on ruthlessness, on the ability to eliminate human obstacles to corporate profit, on being the person other developers called when they needed someone heartless enough to destroy communities for financial gain. You're talking about professional suicide. Davidson warned. No one will work with you if word gets out that you walked away from a major deal because you got sentimental about a few small-town families. Then maybe I need to find different people to work with. She reached for the development contracts, the artifact that represented everything she'd built her career, on the legal framework that allowed corporate interests to override community concerns, profit to trump people, efficiency to eliminate empathy. And then, with the deliberate ceremony of someone performing a ritual that would change the course of her life, she began tearing the contracts in half. Jesus Christ! Henderson lunged across the table, but she stepped back, continuing to tear the documents into smaller and smaller pieces. This project is dead, she announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. Find another location, find another developer, find another community to destroy. But it won't be Milbrook, and it won't be me. The torn pieces of contract fell like snow onto the conference table, settling among the financial projections and environmental assessments and all the other documents that had been carefully prepared to justify the elimination of a place where people still believed in taking care of each other. Henderson's face had gone from red to purple. You're finished in this business, Langford. Finished. I'll make sure every developer from here to New York knows that you can't be trusted to close a deal. Good, she replied, surprising herself with how calm she felt. Maybe that will save some other communities from going through what we were about to put Milbrook through. 6 months later, Celeste stood in the same spot beside Milbrook's founding plaque, but everything had changed. The desert morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made the small town look like a postcard from a simpler, better world. But this time, she wasn't reading about the town's history as an outsider preparing to destroy it. She was reading it as someone who had become part of that ongoing story. Her Bentley was long gone, sold along with most of her other symbols of corporate success. In its place sat a modest Honda Civic that Emma had decorated with flower-shaped magnets and Mason had carefully maintained to run like a dream. The car represented everything she'd learned about the difference between having expensive things and having meaningful relationships. The transition hadn't been easy. Walking away from Henderson's deal had indeed destroyed her reputation in the development world, just as he'd promised. Former colleagues treated her like a pariah, business contacts stopped returning her calls, and the financial press had written scathing articles about her corporate breakdown and inexplicable abandonment of fiduciary responsibility. But along with losing her old life, she'd discovered possibilities she'd never imagined. Her technology company, restructured around employee ownership and community impact rather than maximum profit extraction, had become a model for ethical business practices. Instead of eliminating inefficiencies by firing people, they'd found ways to eliminate waste by empowering workers to solve problems collaboratively. She'd also discovered that she was good at things beyond corporate conquest. The small house she'd bought on Milbrook's main street, 3 blocks from Mason's garage, had become a place where neighbors stopped by for coffee, where Emma did homework at the kitchen table, where she was learning to cook recipes from Maria's wooden box. The adjustment had been difficult for all of them. Mason's initial wariness had taken months to overcome. Emma's hurt at feeling betrayed had required patience, consistency, and the kind of emotional availability Celeste had never practiced. And her own process of learning to live without the armor of corporate ruthlessness had involved discovering vulnerabilities she'd spent decades trying to eliminate. But slowly, carefully, like the methodical repair of a complex engine, they'd built something new together. Miss Celeste, Emma's voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see the little girl running toward her with a portfolio of artwork clutched against her chest. At 7 now, Emma had grown taller and more confident, but her essential sweetness remained unchanged. "I finished the picture for the library's art show," Emma announced breathlessly. "Want to see?" Celeste crouched down as Emma opened her portfolio to reveal a drawing that took her breath away. It showed Milbrook's main street, but not as it existed now as Emma imagined it could be. The buildings were the same, but there were new additions: solar panels on rooftops, a community garden where the vacant lot had been, children playing in a small park, and connecting everything, a series of rainbow-colored bridges that seemed to float above the streets. "It's called Building Bridges," Emma explained proudly, "like the princess in the story we read. See, these bridges connect all the places where people do things together, the school and the library, the garage and the diner, your house and our house." The artifact represented not just artistic growth, but a child's vision of community as something that could always be improved, always be made more connected, always be built around the principle that bridges were better than walls. "It's beautiful," Celeste said, meaning it completely. "The library show is going to be amazing. Will you and Daddy both come to the opening?" "We wouldn't miss it." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Mason appeared around the corner, wiping his hands on the ever-present rag that had become as much a part of his identity as his gentle smile. The sight of him still made something warm unfold in Celeste's chestnut, the desperate attraction of early romance, but the deeper satisfaction of partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. "Morning, beautiful ladies," he said, kissing Emma's forehead, and then, more tentatively, touching Celeste's hand. Their physical relationship had developed slowly, carefully, like everything else, between them built on trust rather than passion, companionship rather than conquest. "Did you see my picture?" Emma demanded, holding up her artwork. "I saw it yesterday when you were working on the final touches," Mason replied, "and I think it's going to win first prize." "That's not why I made it," Emma said with the seriousness that characterized all her observations about art and life. "I made it because I wanted people to see what Milbrook could look like if we all worked together to make it better." The philosophy behind her words, the belief that communities could be actively improved through collective effort rather than passively consumed by individual acquisition, represented everything Celeste had learned about the difference between building wealth and building meaning. "Speaking of making things better," Mason said, "I have news." Celeste and Emma both looked at him expectantly. "The community college approved our proposal for the automotive training program. We'll be able to offer classes here in Milbrook starting this fall, teaching young people skills they can use anywhere while keeping them connected to home." The news represented months of work by Celeste, Mason, and a committee of community leaders who had believed they could create economic opportunity without destroying the social fabric that made their town special. Instead of waiting for outside developers to bring change, they were creating their own vision of progress. "That's wonderful," Celeste said, genuinely thrilled. "How many students can we accommodate?" 20 in the first cohort, but if it goes well, we can expand. The beauty is that graduates will have skills that travel, they can work anywhere, but also roots that run deep enough to bring them home when they're ready to settle down. Emma had been listening with the focused attention she brought to all adult conversations that interested her. "Does this mean other kids will learn to fix things like you taught me?" "Exactly like that," Mason confirmed. "And some of them might even be as good at it as you are." Emma beamed, then did something that had become routine, but never ceased to touch. Celeste's heart. She reached out and took both adults' hands, creating a small circle of connection right there on the main street, where she'd once been a stranger, demanding impossible service. "I'm proud of us," Emma announced solemnly. "We built something good together." The simple statement carried the weight of profound truth. They had built something good together, not just a romantic relationship or a blended family, but a model for how people could choose collaboration over competition, community over conquest, love over leverage. As they walked toward the library where Emma's art would soon be displayed, Celeste found herself thinking about the woman who had stormed into Mason's garage 6 months ago. That person had measured success by the size of her bank account, the fear she inspired in competitors, the efficiency with which she could eliminate obstacles to maximum profit. This person measured success by entirely different standards. Emma's laughter, Mason's contentment, the neighbors who had learned to trust her despite her history, the community college students who would soon learn skills that could take them anywhere but roots that would call them home. Her phone buzzed with a text message, from panicked corporate subordinates or demanding investors, but from her assistant Jennifer, who had followed her example by leaving the corporate world to start a non-profit supporting small business development in rural communities. Newtown in Oregon, requesting consultation on sustainable development. Interested? Celeste smiled, typing back. Send me the details. And make sure they understand we're not there to change them, we're there to help them become more of who they already are. As they reached the library, Emma ran ahead to find the librarian and discuss the placement of her artwork. Mason and Celeste paused on the steps, looking back at the town that had become their shared home. Any regrets? Mason asked quietly. Celeste considered the question seriously. She had lost her fortune, her corporate empire, her reputation in the business world. She lived in a small house instead of a penthouse, drove a modest car instead of a luxury vehicle, spent her time solving community problems instead of maximizing shareholder value. None, she said, and realized it was completely true. Not even when you're balancing our household budget instead of managing billion-dollar acquisitions. She laughed, remembering her first attempt at grocery shopping for a family of 3, her confusion over coupons and sale prices, and the careful arithmetic of making sure there was enough money left for Emma's art supplies. Especially not then, she replied. Turns out that managing a budget where every dollar matters is more satisfying than managing accounts where losing $1 million is a rounding error. Mason's smile was warm with understanding. Maria used to say that the best life was the one where everything you did mattered to someone you loved. She was right, Celeste said, then added more quietly, I hope she would approve of how things turned out. She would, Mason replied without hesitation. She always believed that people could change if they had good enough reasons. Emma and I were apparently good enough reasons for you. As if she'd heard her name, Emma appeared in the library doorway, waving them inside to see where her bridge-building artwork would be displayed. The drawing would hang beside works by other local artista community, celebration of creativity and vision, of people who believed their small town was worth preserving, improving, and sharing with the world. Celeste followed Mason and Emma into the library, into the warm embrace of a community that had learned to trust her despite her history, into a life that measured wealth by the depth of relationships rather than the size of bank accounts. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher into a sky that stretched endlessly above the small town that had taught her the difference between having everything and being truly rich. And in her pocket, Emma's original drawing of the flying car remained carefully folded, reminder that sometimes the most important repairs happen not to engines, but to hearts that have forgotten how to hope. Some things she had learned really couldn't be fixed in an hour, but they could begin. And beginning, it turned out, was everything.